are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards, and my guest today is world famous, even if you don't know her name. She is an author, screenwriter, producer, director, and a two-time Emmy Award winner. Melissa Jo Peltier has worked with people like Oprah Winfrey, Tom Hanks, and Cesar Millan, and she's married to director John Gray, which means today isn't her first time meeting someone famous. So, Melissa, welcome to the Stories from Real Life podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Melvin. I was able to listen to a couple of your pods, and they're excellent. They're just so good. I mean, you have such great people and such great subjects. So I'm very, very fortunate to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Peltier won her first Emmy for educational programming at 23 years old. Since then, she has accumulated over 50 national and international awards and accolades for her work as a producer, writer, and director of television and film. Obviously, those are impressive accomplishments, but my first question has to do with one of my favorite movies from the early 2000s. Tell me about being the executive producer of My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Well, actually, that's a really kind of it could get that's a long Hollywood story, but I will give you it can get kind of ugly, so I will give you the nice part of it. So I formed a company in 1995, I think, with two partners. And one of my partners, Jim Milio, made a film as one of our first projects. We got the funding for a super low budget film. And it was actually one of Will Ferrell's first movies too. But it was called Men Seeking Women. And Nia Vardalos of Greek Wedding fame had a small but very funny role in it. And Jim and Nia got to be friends, and she said, Jim, please let me, I want to give you my script to read. I've taken it all around, and I want to star in it, but nobody wants to do it with me starring in it. So he said, sure, I'll read it. And he told me later, I was like, uh-oh, actress with a script, uh-oh. Because, but it turned out he just loved it. And he gave it to me to read. And I remember very clearly reading it because I used to go to this sushi place on my way home, and I'd eat dinner on my way home because there was a lot of traffic. And I was like literally spitting up stuff. I was laughing so hard. People were staring at me because I was belly laugh. And it's so rare that a script gets you to do that. That's even without the actors. So, and the timing and the editing and the music. So I came back and I said, this is fantastic. And so we ended up optioning it and trying to raise the money for it. And I think we'd raised a little bit of money out of Texas. We had like a Texas guy who was committing. And then in the middle of that, I mean, we weren't very good at raising money. I'm still not good at raising money. But in the middle of trying to raise the money, Nia did a one-woman show, and Rita Wilson, who is Greek, went to the show and fell in love with it and went to her husband, Tom Hanks, and said, we have to do this as a movie. And so, because the one-woman show was pretty much the script, but, in a sort of one-woman stand-up way. Then we got into some negotiations. We ended up buying the script, and then Tom Hanks and Gary Getzman, Playtone Production, from us, and they gave us a percentage and executive producer title. And we had what's called meaningful consultation, which is a Hollywoody thing, but it's it basically means they show it to you. You can tell them what you think of it, and then they can use those notes or not. So that was our big involvement in it, and we went to the premiere and all that kind of stuff. But we didn't do any of the actual work on it, except for the fact that we discovered the script and we were going to have her star in it and nobody else was. So that gave her some leverage, with Tom and Rita. And so, yeah, they were like, yeah, you can star in it. So anyway, so that was the story of that, and it turned out to be a very good arrangement for us because we made money on the sale, but then also it was $5 million movie and it made over 800 million. So
Wow.
there was a little back end in there for us, which was really wonderful. Yeah, yeah,
That's a pretty nice return on investment.
yeah. It was very. I mean, we had no idea. We thought maybe we'd be lucky if it, made back what they spent on it. But it became a word of mouth film, which was really rare. I don't remember exactly. It might have been 2000 or so when the whole thing started. I'd have to look back at old calendars, but uh, it was a huge hit, and it was even then there was a little internet then, but it was a word of mouth film. It was people telling their friends, "You've got to see this movie," and going multiple times. People went multiple times, and the Greek community got behind it like crazy. And they got, because it was Tom Hanks, they got the most incredible supporting cast for her, and it was the role she was born to play. Literally, that was because it was her story. So that's the story of Greek Wedding, and it is a great film. It's such a great film. It's so funny, and they changed very little. Well, they changed very little of it from the original script. Very little. No, they added a friend for the husband, but it was some little thing like that. But the
Okay.
rest of the script was, the jokes were the same, and it was the same script that I laughed, in that sushi restaurant, spitting up my my edamame.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, I watched it a couple of weeks ago with my stepson. We've been watching some older movies that they hadn't seen before, my twin stepsons. And I saw your name at the end of it, and I thought, well, I didn't know she did this. So I was excited about that. You worked on a huge project with Oprah early in your career. So when you started working on that project, did you know Oprah would be the host of it?
No, that project was I was brought in on that project by my mentor Arnold Shapiro, and um, those of us who are older remember Scared Straight. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
It was a documentary. It won the Oscar and it won the Emmy, and it was just a verite program of kids who were brought into Rahway State Prison, kids who were starting to get into trouble, and they were brought into Rahway State Prison, and the prisoners basically tell them what it's like in jail and why they should, straighten up. And it's really powerful. It's a really powerful film. And they go in all cocky, like, yeah, there's no, these guys aren't going to tell me anything that I don't know. And then they come out just shaking. So, and I guess it was a very successful program. But Arnold filmed it, and he made a really beautiful film of it, and it was actually filmed back then. And that's how he sort of got on the map, even though he'd been doing TV for a little while before that. But that's really what his career took off when he got the Oscar for that. So he was my mentor, and I met him in right shortly after I got out of college. So it was like '84 or something, and he he hired me for like $90 a week to be a PA on this series he had going called Pet Peeves. And it was basically pets complain about their owners. They write in to complain about their owners. And yeah, yeah. And it was shot on the studio lot of KTLA. So, here I was right out of college, and I just driving onto a studio lot. That was so exciting, every day. And I had a pass and I could just drive on. And that was, it was a great experience. But of course, I was making $900 a week. And so I went on to some other work after that. And then I came back to Arnold several years after I had a lot of other work under my belt. And he started hiring me to produce stuff, and then produce and direct stuff and write. And he really is my mentor. I mean, he's an incredibly ethical man. And he's the man who sort of told me, how important it is that if you're putting something out on mass media, you can't just, throw spaghetti at a wall. You have to realize, and you have to think out what effect it's going to have on the viewers, because, it might be the only thing somebody sees that day. It might be the only Bible somebody reads that day. So, that has really stuck with me, and I stay with that. And unfortunately, there's a whole generation of reality show people out there who have, no no concept of the fact that they could be really affecting somebody's emotions, mind, view of the
Hmm.
world by what they put out. But so that's why I really don't like reality TV, partly for that reason. But Arnold he was my mentor, and I can't remember the year again. I think it was 92, maybe 92. But he had me. He wanted to do something on child abuse, and I'd already done one documentary on child abuse before that at Dave Bell Associates. That was a big documentary house in Hollywood back then. And so he asked me if I wanted to do it. And actually, I think I did something else for him before that. Yeah, I did the American Dream Contest, which was a big contest of Arnold wanted kids to write in about what's good about America. And then they wrote little scripts, and then we shot them, and we
Okay.
interviewed the kids, and it was a really nice show. It was a really nice show.
That's
It
pretty
was a lot
cool.
of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really cool. And then Arnold was very involved in PETA, and he was involved in uh, um, adults who abuse their kids, and how they uh, those who not sexual abuse, but adults who have hit their kids and are trying to change, and they had support groups. So we did some of that. But Arnold always did really big social issue stuff, which is what I liked. And so I worked with him on some of those. They were little projects. And then he had this project, and he said, "I'm going to get this on every network." And I'm like, okay. It was funded by USAA, the United States Army Insurance Company, and at the time they funded a lot of really powerful docs that he did. He had a connection there, and he basically, would pitch them stuff, and they'd say, "Okay, here's the money." And so that was very fortunate. So they funded it and sponsored it, and he wanted us to do a film on child abuse, every type of child abuse. And he wanted to do it from the point of view of, well, the kids, but also the abusers. Like, how can they deconstruct what happened? Are they on the mend? And we got people who were on the mend. We didn't get anyone who was in denial, because we wanted to hear the mindset. And so we did a sexual abuse of I think it was a stepfather, sexual abuse. And then we did an incest one, which was so powerful. Oh my God. And
Mm.
this guy was, the deacon of his church, and he was the perfect family, perfect, beautiful, blonde, Southern white family, like Leave It to Beaver. And underneath, he was sexually abusing both his daughters for years. And he talked
Wow.
I interviewed him, and he told me all about how he groomed them, what he did. And because anyway, it was a long, and then we had his first confrontation with his older daughter, who was the one who stopped it. And the reason she stopped it was she saw it happening to her little sister, and she couldn't stop it for herself, but she could for her. And she reported him, and the mother didn't know. She claimed to not know, and I kind of believe her, because she was sort of one of those Southern ladies who likes everything on the surface to look perfect, and that's what she's focused on. She's not focused on the deeper stuff going on. And she was a lovely person, but this had happened right under her nose. And the daughters forgave her, because they never told her. They never told her, and she didn't believe them. When they did tell her, she believed them right away, which is huge. That's really important.
Hmm.
And so that was one of them. And then we did a physical abuse story, which was a woman who had killed her baby.
Wow.
She'd been beating her baby, and she threw something at him. She threw something really sharp at him, I think, and it just, and it killed him. And
Wow.
I think she'd been to prison for it. I don't, I'd have to watch it again, because I don't recall all the details of it, but I remember she was something else. And I mean, she was a very troubled person, incredibly troubled. But we interviewed her and we talked about,
Wow.
and then she went back into her childhood of abuse, and it was horrendous what she had been through. I mean, she'd been tortured basically. So,
Wow.
it was another of those cycle things. And then we did a guy who had been emotionally abusive to his kids. He never hit them, but he had come from poverty, and he had some physical abuse in his background from his dad, but he basically would tell his kids they're stupid, and I mean, obviously that's not a crime, but he had gotten into therapy and realized what he'd done and reconciled with them. And so we took him back to like where he grew up and what he went through. And we took, so we did a lot of that. And he talked about, what emotional abuse is. So we just defined that. So those were the 5 stories. But Arnold did get it on. Arnold then called, when we had a rough cut that was good, Arnold called Oprah. And, Arnold Shapiro, she knew who he was. And he said, I want you to host this documentary. And she'd never done anything that wasn't her own production company. And, well, Color Purple, but that's that's a cut above. And she loved it. And she said, yes, she would host it. And so we had that. And then Arnold called all the other networks, and he convinced 2 of the 3 big networks and PBS to all air it simultaneously. And one of them said no, but then they were so shamed by the ratings. The ratings were sort of like through the roof, and we shut down the child abuse hotline, the National Center for Abuse and Neglected Children. And we, it shut down their line. They didn't have enough bandwidth to take all the calls that were coming in, and because we had the number on every tease out to commercial, we had the number. And so, and I wrote and produced and directed that one. It was a real, very emotional process. But working with Oprah was really interesting. I have photos of little me with her, and she, even then she was so big a star that her people were like, okay, you don't get extra takes with her. You do whatever takes you can do, and then you move on, but you don't. So we went in there. We went to Chicago. We went in there. It was on her stage, and we went in there at 6 a.m, and we had an Oprah lookalike who was the same basic build, and we had her as a stand-in, and we set up all our shots, and then we practiced moving from shot to shot. And so we had done it like 10 times by the time she got in. So it went very smoothly. And she was lovely. She was just lovely, professional. She loved Arnold. The 2 of them got on great. And I got to direct Oprah at, I don't know how old I was.
That's pretty awesome.
I wasn't that young. I think I was like 29 or I don't know, or 30. I can't remember.
Okay, tell me a little bit about how you got involved with the Dog Whisperer and Cesar Millan.
Well, that was also my production company, MPH Entertainment, and Kay Sumner and Sheila Emery, who had a company called Emery Sumner Productions, had found there was an article about Cesar in the LA Times, and it was in the style section or whatever, I can't remember what the name of the section is, but it was a big article and had pictures and stuff. And he had been doing a lot of stars dogs, and that's sort of how he came to their attention. And so, and he has a great backstory. I mean, he literally was an illegal immigrant who swam across, got to San Diego, paid a coyote $100 and had another $100 left, I think, or something like that. And like lived under a bridge for a year, and got a dog grooming job grooming dogs at like a dog facility that the owners had trouble with the hard to groom dogs, and he was great with them. And he barely spoke English, and they let him sleep in their like spare room at the grooming place. So that's really, I mean, that's incredible backstory. And talk about self-made. He is a self-made man, 100%. But when that article came out, probably 20 different producers in Hollywood came, traipsing down to his dog center in South Central LA, and he felt they were all. Caesar's a very instinctual person, and he goes on his gut a lot, which is sometimes wrong, I have to say, but it's often right. And it was right for us anyway, because he liked Kay and Sheila because they weren't like all Hollywoody show business, promising this, promising that. They were just like they wanted a great show about dogs, and they love dogs. They were animal people, and they were two sort of older. They were older than him. They're older women, and he just, I think it was sort of maternal maybe, but he signed with them, which was amazing. And he'd already done like a pilot with Will and Jada that didn't work and all this stuff, but he signed with them, and they brought it to National Geographic and Animal Planet, and both of them said, "We want this, but you need to pair up with a approved production company." And that's what we were. We were doing a lot of shows for A&E and Discovery and those kind of networks. So they came to us. We knew Kay from the TV Academy, and they came to us, and we saw the tape, and it was great, and we sort of redid the tape. And then Caesar came in, and well, actually, before we redid it, he came in and we met with him. And he brought Daddy, if you remember Daddy, his big pit bull, his big red-nosed pit bull, huge head.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
gentle giant. And he brought Daddy in, and Daddy was like, I fell in love with Daddy. And he's honestly, next to my dog Franny, he's one of the most spiritual dogs that I've ever met. I mean, he just understood. He understood what was going on. He might not have understood words, but he got the gist of everything. Franny, my dog Franny's like that. But so we met with him, and I believe my partner Jim said to me, he's going to be a star with or without us. And I said, well, let's have him be a star with us. And so we went to Nat Geo and Animal Planet. And Animal Planet, I think they offered us like 3-hour-long shows. And Nat Geo offered us 22 half-hour shows. And at a really low budget, but still 22 shows, you could amortize that over a long period. So we did those. And the first year, it was not a hit. They had it on at 7 p.m. and they had them only half hours. And we thought they were not going to be picked up. Michael Cassio, who I knew from A&E days, a lot of executives in TV move around, and he was now head of programming at Nat Geo, and he was head of programming at A&E when I knew him. And so he obviously he had like a soft spot for our company, because I had done one of his biggest hits before the company, and then after we had done one of his biggest hits, which was the miniseries on Las Vegas. And so we had a good in with him. But I remember him calling me up and saying, well, we're just not sure, it's just not getting the numbers. And we couldn't believe it, because we were getting thousands of letters. And, oh my God, you changed my life. Wow. And we're like, how could people not be watching this? It was really odd. So they moved it to 8 p.m. and they started doing double shows, like 2 half hours together. And the ratings shot through the roof. And so they ordered a second season, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth, and a seventh, and an eighth, and a ninth. And the 10th season was sort of like a partial season. And when we did some shows in England and Australia. But so it really took off, and it was a journey. And I owe the fact that I'm really good with dogs to Caesar, and well, also on my dogs, they teach me a lot. But I mean, he really is, and he just knows them. He knows them, and I ended up writing, co-writing his books with him, credited ghostwriting, and that was an interesting.
Was that fun?
Experience. It was tough, because Caesar was overextended and overbooked. Plus, he had 2 little kids. And so it was very hard to get time with him. And as each book went on, he sort of was like less into spending the time. So I had to, the last book I actually did, I used a lot of other dog trainers to help, fatten it up because they wanted a book on training, not just behavior, which Caesar says I'm not a trainer. I'm a behavior person. I'm about energy and behavior. And so they wanted us to talk to trainers, like how do you train a dog to sniff cancer? How do you train a dog to be in a movie? So I ended up, working with a lot of other trainers, and then we brought Caesar in to meet them, and he asked them questions and stuff like that. So it was hard work. It was very hard work. And we're fortunate. The first book is still selling, and I actually think it's one of the weaker books at this point. I think the best book is How to Raise a Perfect Dog, which is we took these puppies and I actually made a special on it called How to Raise a Perfect Dog, because what we did was we took puppies and we actually raised them for the book and then for the special. So we took them through, when they first came home, when Caesar was choosing them, and how to choose the right dog for you. I mean, it was really intense, and I think that book covers pretty much everything you could ever want.
So I know you've done a lot of other interesting projects that have also been successful. Your newest project is called "The Game Is Up: Disillusioned Trump Voters Tell Their Stories." So why did you decide to do a political documentary?
I just couldn't not do it. I think what happened was, Trump got elected, and I was one of the people who knew that he could get elected because both my husband and I and our families have Trump thinking people. It's like, the immigrants are the problem. This is the problem. This is the problem. They're looking for a simple solution, and Trump gave them simple solutions. Plus, they thought he was a billionaire because they'd watched Apprentice for years. And by the way, I worked with Mark Burnett way, way back. My company, it was one of our first shows. We worked with Mark Burnett. And anyway, so Mark Burnett really whitewashed him on that show. And a lot of editors who had worked for our company were working for Mark because he paid them so much more. But they all had NDAs. They're not supposed to talk about the show, but everybody talks about the show. You get somebody, in a bar or reunion party or something, and then they tell stories. And it was very clear that Donald Trump was created in editing. They had some brilliant editors and assistant editors who went through all that material and made him look great when on the set. And I guess you could ask Noel Castler this. On the set, he was a disaster. But the magic of film and TV is what you see through the lens, and what you see and edited is reality. And so that's what was sold to the American people for all those years. And he was the genius billionaire businessman, and nobody talked about his bankruptcies or his the people whose lives he destroyed and all these things. And of course, a lot of us in New York knew about that, and a lot of people in Hollywood just knew how fake he was. But that was, I knew that it could happen because I knew how people, again, like going back to what Arnold taught me, you might be the only Bible somebody reads today. What you put out on TV can have an immense influence on how somebody thinks. And so I was very upset when he got elected, and I knew he'd be bad. And I knew it would be really hard to get him out of the office. I used to say, they're going to have the Secret Service like drag him out with his nails left in the desk. But which almost, it pretty much was what happened. But as things went on and as things got worse and worse, and I didn't see people I thought people are seeing this, right? And people weren't seeing it. They were getting more, the more bad stuff he did, and the more he was justly criticized for that, the more dug in his followers got to him. And I just thought that there were people out there who were in sort of MAGA circles, red areas, who probably went to bed with knots in their stomach after some of the things he said and did. But they couldn't say it because everyone around them was so pro-Trump. And so, it was basically internal gaslighting. I can't say anything. I don't want to be ostracized. And one of the most incredible human needs is to be accepted by a group, and to be ostracized for some people, especially like in Christian circles, is like death. And so I just thought, well, what if they could see people like them who changed their mind and really learn why they changed their mind in a very logical way, maybe they would get permission, to at least, maybe it would just open that crack a little bit. And so that's what I was thinking about. And Mary Carey Craven, who she was the one who was, because she's been in the industry for many, many years also. And both of us were sort of, I wouldn't say we were retired, but we weren't really working in it at the moment. And I was making short films with my husband, but we were doing that ourselves. And so Mary basically said, well, because I've been talking about doing this, but I'm terrible at raising money. I don't know how to raise money. I want money. I want a sugar daddy. I want something so I can do these films. But I couldn't, and I went to some people. I went to the Democratic Party. Nobody wanted to do it. And they're all like, oh, you can't get this done in time for the election. And if I had a budget, I would have been able to. But we ended up having to do our post-production in like Bulgaria, I think. and we had to be sending 5K files to very slow internet. So we could only send 6 minutes at a time for our color correction and our graphics and stuff like that. I mean, it was rough. And we did run out of money. Wow. And I ended up paying for most of it. But I emptied out my money market account for it, but it was worth it. I mean, I'm just grateful I had that money to spend on it, because I don't think I could have lived with myself if he had gotten reelected and I hadn't made that film. I don't think it had any effect. Maybe it did, because it wasn't before he was elected. I think it had some effect before the midterms in 2022, because that's when we released it. We released segments of it before the election, because we had some segments that were, the post-production had been done. The Joe Walsh segment and the Batya Goldberg segment. But that was it.
What did you learn from making the film that you didn't already know, but you may have suspected?
Well, I didn't know that actually at Liberty University, they actually tell you in so many words that you should vote Republican, that Republican and Christian is the same thing. And they have Republicans come speak, and they have, they don't, and yeah, sure, they're a conservative university, but I think a lot of this really crosses a line. And the same thing with churches. In the couple that we profiled in the film, Ron and Cindy, they were longtime churchgoers at this one church, and their minister, had basically told Ron, who was kind of a newer Christian, he'd only been a Christian for like 3 years, to vote for Trump. He said, you have to vote for him. And he told him the story of King Cyrus, and he said, God sometimes chooses wicked people to do, the Lord's work, and and it changes them, and we have to get judges for abortion, and so he did vote for him, and he felt terrible about it because he just had an instinct. She didn't vote for, she didn't vote, or she wrote somebody in, I can't remember, but she didn't like Trump, but she just didn't talk about it. She had been a lifelong Christian. Her whole circles were all Christian people, and very tight-knit. So she just didn't tell them. She just voted for who she wanted to, because her conscience told her not to do it. And she just never told anybody. And her husband, Ron, did vote for him because the pastor told him to. And he felt terrible about it. And they were preached in their church who to vote for, which to me, again, why should you be tax exempt if you're working as I didn't think that they actually told you who to vote for and told you the other person was bad and evil. I thought they would give you when I grew up going to church, and I grew up both Catholic and Protestant. My dad was Catholic and my mother was more of an agnostic, but my grandmother was an Episcopalian. So I sort of had Sunday school in both. But, that was unheard of. I mean, they might, especially like in the 70s when I was growing up, we had at the Episcopal Church, we had like our hip pastor who would give us these, sort of moral of the story, accepting other people kind of stuff. But they would never say, and that's why you have to vote for Jimmy Carter or whatever. They would never say that ever. And it just was amazing to me.
It's really interesting because growing up in an all black church in the 70s, we had always at election time we would have Democratic candidates come to our church
Right, right.
and they would speak from the pulpit. So why you should vote for them. And even as a kid, it made me
Yeah,
uncomfortable. Like I don't see you here during the 2 years or four
I
years in the
agree.
interim. So I don't want to see you here asking for our votes if you weren't here supporting us
Right.
the other time. So I don't want any of them saying anything in the pulpit for either party, any candidates.
I
Just
don't think they should. And I don't
stick
think
to why
that
you're
I think,
there.
like if Bishop Swan wants to have a poverty thing and invite candidates or invite politicians who share his beliefs, and it's not, it could even be in the church, but it's not it's not going to church. It's not the service. It's not the mass.
Right,
That's okay with me.
right,
But
right,
if I go to church on Sunday, I'm not going to figure out who to vote for. I'm going to try to connect to my spiritual side and trying to, I want to hear something that's going to inspire me to be a better person. Um, not to help somebody get into office.
right. I completely
And
agree.
yeah,
I
yeah.
agree.
So that was interesting. That's something I learned. Um, and I also learned that uh, there's a lot of racism, and I didn't realize there was so much racism and so much kind of MAGA thinking in the military. I didn't know that, and now I know it very well, and it's really scary.
Wow.
And it was turns out it was part of the whole KKK white nationalist plan was to get into law enforcement in the military, and they've been doing it since the 80s because they were getting arrested a lot. And they had, I've spoken to an sorry about that. I've spoken to an FBI officer who was undercover with the KKK, and they were really breaking them up. They were really hurting them. Law enforcement was really hurting them. They would do illegal stuff, and they were really hurting them. And so they said, they got together and said, well, the solution is because they obviously had cops that were on their side, especially in the Deep South. And so they said, we just got to get more of those, and we got to get them, higher up. We got to get them in the military. We have to get them in, the CIA, the FBI. And so that was actually a goal, that was talked about at meetings, and white supremacists who have come out talk about it now. So I didn't realize that. That's something I didn't realize. But I also, I learned something I suspected, which is that people change when things affect them personally. It doesn't mean they don't have empathy, but like for instance, Chris Gibbs, who was our farmer, lifelong Reagan Republican, good man, good salt of the earth, Ohio farmer, go to church, um, he wasn't particularly prejudiced but he was a Republican, and he believed Republicans, he didn't believe in the whole woke thing. He thought, in fact, he had a lot of preconceptions about Democrats that he learned were wrong. And right now, he's the head of the Democratic Party in his county from being the head of the Republican Central
Wow.
Committee in his party and getting kicked out because he criticized Trump. He's he's gone the other way, and just a wonderful person. And he's like, he's a moderate
Wow.
Democrat, and that's sort of what he always was, I think. Maybe not always, but once the Republican Party really started to change, that's what he became. So Chris was really not that aware of all the other things that Trump was hurting, because he owns a farm, a huge farm. It's his business. It's 24/7. He's always been a farmer, and that's his focus. And he wanted a president who was going to help agriculture. And he'd actually worked in the government in Ohio, helping the farm, with the Department of Agriculture, helping farm relief. So he sort of knew how that worked. And Chris started to see that this tariff thing was, he knew right from the beginning that it was bad, but it really, really hurt farmers. And as he said, they were paid hush money to shut up about it and to keep supporting Trump with the subsidies that they got, and, huge subsidies. But there were farmer suicides going through the roof. People were going bankrupt. People were losing family farms. Now, we don't hear about that in the media, but Chris saw this firsthand, and that's really when he turned. And then he wrote an op-ed about how, basically Trump promised a lot of stuff and hasn't delivered it. And he got kicked out of his Republican Party. And then he was like, wait a minute. So he ran against Jim Jordan as an independent. He didn't get, there was some real monkey business with his signature stuff going on, and he didn't get on the ballot. But, Jim Jordan, basically that district is so gerrymandered that, or was, I don't know if that's going to be fixed, but so he wanted to do something, but it really didn't affect him until he started seeing it in his bottom line, in his business. And I think one of the things that turned our vet into an anti-Trumper was learning that Trump had, dodged the draft 5 times. I mean, he thought of him as like this kind of like Patton kind of figure, you know. And he's like, what? He got out because he had what? Like a bone spur in his foot? What? And then he learned that he probably didn't have a bone spur that was signed off on. But I mean, 5 times of deferments, that's pretty
That's
bad.
a lot of deferments.
It is, and especially if you're somebody who joined the the military because you believed in your country. And so that was one issue that happened that appealed to him. I think with Ron, the Christian, somebody at his work, he was talking about Jesus and how Jesus had changed his life, and it had been like 3 or 4 years. And he was talking to a guy in his break room who'd never really, criticized him. But he finally said, well, why would I ever want to be a Christian if you support such a terrible human being? And he said, that truth just hit him like a punch in the stomach, and he just couldn't go on, And I mean, he was like really like, oh my God, he's right. He's right. Everything I've learned, everything on my Bible study that I do 3 days a week, and my my services that I go to, is teaching me what Jesus was, and this is the opposite. And so that was something that happened. And then, of course, Batya Goldberg, she was rising star in the right, she was a rising star in the Republican Party, and like young Republicans. And she was really young, but she was. People were just talking about her. She was in that sort of Charlie Kirk kind of circles. Candace Owen, Charlie Kirk,
Owens.
Owens, Ben Shapiro. And she was really gung ho, and she loved Trump. She was gung ho about him. She helped him get elected. And when Charlottesville happened, she had, she heard Trump say, obviously, there were very fine people on both sides. And she was astonished because she had seen those guys with the torches and Jews will not replace us and blood and soil. And she knew what that was. And her parents, as it turned out, were refugees. Well, they had fled Russia in the 80s, and they got U.S. citizenship. And they were both. Her dad was a professor, I believe, and her mother is a psychiatrist. And they had always told her what it was like in Soviet Russia and what totalitarianism is and what dictators do, for real, not like your imagined thing. Oh, the dictator just makes the trains run on time, which I think is what a lot of Americans think. No, that's not what happens at all. I mean, you could be arrested for like smiling at the wrong time or at the wrong person. And so she knew that. And she started sort of challenging some of these people she was with, and she didn't like the answers she was getting. So that was, again, it was a personal thing that made her wake up. And so I think that's what happens to people when something personal affects them. I mean, a lot of us are sort of generally empathetic, and if something happens to somebody else, we're like, no, that's not acceptable. But people, and Americans are workaholics. We're all in our own lives. It's a tough time economically. I'm not talking about, inflation or COVID. I'm talking about just in general. It's harder and harder because the working people are making less and less in relation to what their bosses are making. And so, we focus on our lives. So sometimes it does take something touching our lives to wake us up. Um, I think it's forgivable, but you want to try to reach those people. You want to try to reach them anyway. So yeah, and I do know that Chris Gibbs reached a lot of people because farmers have I think they're Americans first and farmers second, and I think that the farmer identity really, because he's such a farmer, he was such a Republican, and I think his words are so logical and so clear. I think a lot of farmers knew in their gut that things weren't right, and then he snapped them out of it. So that was my goal. My goal was to give people permission to change their minds.
As we start to wind down the interview, I've got a couple more personal questions for you, if you
Okay.
don't mind. I mentioned your husband is John Gray, who's the creator of the TV show The Ghost Whisperer, and that show starred Jennifer Love Hewitt. So how did you and John meet?
Well, we met. Actually, he wrote a script for my company. He was at the time like a super A-list TV movie miniseries director for the networks, and we had the same agent at one point, and we had a really great story that would have made a great movie. And the agent said, "You have to meet John Gray. This is a story for him." And he fell in love with it. It was about most people don't know, but families lived on Alcatraz, whole families, and families of the guards. So they had, yeah, it was like a little teeny town for non-inmates. And they were all, under threat in 47 when there was the big breakout. And so it was basically a story around that. It was about a father raising his daughter. It was one of my business partner's wives was her mother had grown up on Alcatraz Island as a kid, and her grandfather was a guard. So
Wow.
It was just an amazing story, and he wrote a beautiful script, and it didn't get made. But that's how we met, and we were both in our own dysfunctional relationships at the time, so I don't think we looked at each other twice. but but we both then proceeded to get out of those relationships. And he lived in New York, I lived in LA, and he let me know he was coming out to LA, and we had lunch, and then lunch turned into dinner, and then it was sort of like, where have you been all my life? And it really was from the beginning. And so we knew each other for 3 years, we dated for 3 years, and then we got married.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So let's go all the way back to the beginning.
Okay.
So you grew up in New England.
Yes.
And you graduated from college in California.
Yeah.
And that's as geographically distant as you can get in the mainland United States. Did you go to California to study film?
Well, no, I went to Pomona College, which is like a classic liberal arts college. And in fact, they have film courses there now, but there was only like 2 film courses in all of the Claremont colleges at the time. But I was in the theater department because at the time I thought I might want to be an actor, but I decided against that like by the end of my freshman year. But I knew that I wanted to be in entertainment, and I knew it was LA or New York. And Pomona College gave me a very big scholarship to go there. And
nice.
New York, I got into Barnard, but they didn't give me a big scholarship. Cornell didn't give me a big scholarship. They gave me like $150 for books or something, and it was just, it was kind of a no-brainer. Plus I went out there and I just fell in love with it. It's just such a special school. And my class, graduating class of 1983, it's just it was a great, whoever picked that class, because there were small classes. It's like 400 or something. I don't know. But we're all sort of like odd iconoclasts, odd, smart iconoclasts, who don't really fit in like into any slots. So it was a great experience. I'm so glad I went there. And I started working while I was in school my senior year. I started working in TV.
Okay. So last question here.
Mm-hmm.
What are you working on now?
Well, my husband and I are getting ready to do another short. This one is going to be about well, we don't really, a lot of our shorts aren't most of our shorts aren't issue. I mean, my husband writes them, and he has a very quirky sense of humor. It's like my husband writes stuff that's quirky and then emotional or really scary. And we've done some horror films too, which are really fun to do. And that's been fun because we love working together, and I love working in narrative. Before that, I'd only done a little bit of narrative and a little bit of dramatic directing and stuff like that. So that was something I always wanted to do from my theater background, and that's what he was doing. And so we just started to do that together. But so we're working on this next one. This next one has a little issue in it, and I think it's going to be really good. We've entered a few of them in the Academy Award short. We're like, we gotta hit it sometime, but we go to festivals a lot. I just came back from 4 festivals, and it's really fun. It's fun to go to the festivals and meet young filmmakers, but also old folks like us there. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of older filmmakers. It depends on the festival, but like Sedona is an incredible festival, and it's all ages. They have from college students to 80-year-olds, and we love that one. We just came back from that, and so we're working on that. And I am working on another political film that I want to make. It's a huge research thing, and I've gotten bogged down in the research. So now we're coming up against time, and again, the problem is, how do you get money? But I'm going to continue to put the treatment and the budget together and just see what happens, because I come out of TV. Both of us come out of TV, which is why we can work really fast. We made a feature. John and I made a feature in 17 days, and in TV, you don't have that. You can't push back the release date. It's like it's got to be. You've got 7 days to shoot, 8 days to shoot, and it's got to be on the air in 2 weeks. So you learn to work with that kind of discipline and that kind of. And the only way to do it is if you have a budget that works. I don't. I mean, we worked on that film for a long time, and it made me realize why I love. I gravitated toward TV because it's fast. I like to move on to the next thing. And it's hard for me. It's hard to keep my motivation up and my interest up on one project for, 3 years. And in fact, we're right about to do another promotional push for The Game Is Up, because it is still very relevant. And it's weird to go back into that. But, I made it to help, and that's what it's for.
Mm-hmm.
And the next one will be for that too, if we can get it done.
But that is a good place to end this episode. So our guest today has been multiple award-winning writer, director, and producer, Melissa Jo Peltier. Melissa, thank you for being here and sharing your stories. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Melvin. You're a great interviewer. You really are. And I'm a good interviewer, so I know one.
Thank you.
You are.
You just made my day.
Good.
Thank you. So that's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go. That was Stories from Real Life with your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. See you then.